When is enough enough? When is too much too much? When does the frog in the pot realize that it is being boiled alive? These are questions that have been asked before. And with everything going on in the world right now, that's kind of crazy, and that is an understatement. It made me think of a man who was born in that geographic region, just hundreds of miles away. And he was born in the 20th century in Russia. He was a military officer before he was a political prisoner. And when he was a political prisoner, he wrote a series of notes and writings. Now we know it as a book, and that book is called The Gulag Archipelago. And as many of you know, I am referring to Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And while he was a prisoner there, he had a lot of time to reflect and think back in retrospect how he got where he was, how Russia got where it was. It didn't happen overnight. They were like a frog that was slowly boiled alive. And in his book, The Gulag Archipelago, he wrote about this extensively. And I want to read one excerpt of that. So it's up here in the top left. At what exact point, then, should one resist? When one's belt is taken away? When one is ordered to face into a corner? When one crosses the threshold of one's home? An arrest consists of a series of incidental irrelevancies, of a multitude of things that do not matter. And there seems no point in arguing about any one of them individually, especially at a time when the thought of the person arrested are wrapped tightly about the big question. What for? And yet all these incidental irrelevancies taken together implacably constitute the arrest. And how we burned in the camps later thinking, what would things have been like if every security operative, the Russian secret police, or not secret, but political enforcement, when each one of them went out at night to make an arrest, had been uncertain whether he would return alive and had to say goodbye to his family. Or if, during periods of mass arrests, for example, in Leningrad, when they arrested a quarter of the entire city, people had not simply sat there in their lairs, paling with terror at every bang of the downstairs door and at every step on the staircase, but understand that they had nothing left to lose and had boldly set up in the downstairs hall an ambush of half a dozen people with axes, hammers, pokers, or whatever else was at hand. After all, you knew ahead of time that these blue caps were out at night for no good purpose, and you could be sure ahead of time that you'd be cracking the skull of a cutthroat. Or what about the Black Maria, sitting out there on the street with one lonely chauffeur? What if it had been driven off, or its tires spiked? The organs would have very quickly suffered a shortage of officers and transport, and notwithstanding all of Stalin's thirst, the cursed machine would have ground to a halt. If we didn't love freedom enough. You know, in a way, it's a very simple question that he's asking, but it is a very applicable one, both on a macro and micro scale. When we think again to world events right now, just as a mental thought exercise, how would a nation engage in conflict, in war, when the population is not supportive of one? When would they realize that they were being boiled alive? When would they realize that The status quo was no longer the status quo that it had been. And on a personal level, it's a very important question to ask from a preparedness perspective. How do we make sure that we do not end up like any of those 20th century Russian individuals who at one point were law-abiding citizens until they no longer were, not because they had changed the way they lived or acted, but because the rules, the Overton's window, had shifted on them. What indicators do you have that will bring you to pull the trigger, metaphorically speaking? Or hopefully not, literally. You know, if you don't have these lines, these criteria already set up before things happen, you will end up just like Alexander Solzhenitsyn, looking back and wondering. And if things get bad enough, regretting that you never drew that line. Things are getting worse right now. They've been getting worse. And I think that on a much more minor scale than communist Russia, the Bolshevik Revolution and all it entailed, we can look back at summer 2020, and I think we see the same pattern. People don't like to admit that things have gotten bad or are getting worse. And rarely are they willing to make a change until there's a gun to their head. They'd rather call it a summer of love than admit that things have gotten worse. You know, 2020 was the first year since 1993 that crime stopped decreasing and the trend went up. Now, I'm not saying that things are irreparably bad right now. I'm not even saying that Western civilization is done or it's time to go start a militia. I don't know. You pick your action. But what I am saying is that we need to have these things in our mind. We need to know before crisis happens how we will operate in crisis. And that's one of the most fundamental aspects of planning for any emergency, disaster, or catastrophe. We need to know before it happens when we deploy. When do we activate? So if your plan, whether it be written, whether it be in your mind, if you don't have criteria already, you're very vulnerable. Because just like Alexander Solzhenitsyn, you might not know to act until it's too late, until they're knocking on your door, until hungry people are outside. Because you stayed in the city when there were clear indicators that there's going to be food shortages. You didn't buy your food beforehand. You didn't leave the city. You didn't take action. Because we have a normalcy bias. We think, just by human nature, that the way things are right now, the way things have been since we've always known them, are going to be how it is for as long as we know them. But that's a logical fallacy. That's not how the world works. It's not how it's ever worked. Throughout all of human history, we've been in a constant cycle of growth, decline, and decay. And it's up to you to decide where we are on that. And you know, they overlap. One civilization, one nation, one culture can be in decline, while the other one's in growth, while another's in decay. Doesn't mean all hope is lost. We just have to think about these things, and we have to take them seriously. And we have to know beforehand when we're going to do what we need to do. And I'm not going to drag this video out anymore. I just wanted to discuss this topic a little bit because it's something I've thought about for years. Because the normal operation I see from 99% of people is to take no action because things aren't bad enough yet. But when things are truly bad, it will be too late. So that's why we take action now. And that's what this channel is all about. So it's not the time to be scared, to freak out, to panic. It's the time to get prepared, like we always say. Fear creates negative emotion, and when we are emotional, we make bad decisions. We don't want that. We just need to be able to look at this issue critically and evaluate it with a sober mind, acknowledge the hazard, the risk, and then take action and mitigate it and prepare for it in any way we can. And that's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to keep doing. And I hope you stick around to keep doing that with me. And we'll do it together. It'll be fun. Well, as fun as it can be to prepare for widespread death and despair. But you know what I'm saying. If you would be so kind to subscribe or like this video if you liked it. Even if you didn't, I mean, you can like it, but I don't know. I'm bad with this whole closing off thing, but I'm going to cut it there, guys. I hope you have a good one. See ya.